the San Jose attraction will now allow visitors to view parts of the home that have never been seen before.
This house is a manifestation of Sarah Winchester, and I think in that sense, it's haunted.
160 rooms, over 2,000 doors, around 10,000 windows, 47 fireplaces, staircases that lead directly into ceilings, and doors that open into solid walls. Welcome to the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. For more than 100 years, people believed it was the work of a wealthy widow who had lost her mind after being told ghosts were hunting her. But recently, structural engineers, historians, and paranormal investigators examined the house using modern technology, and what they discovered challenged almost every part of that story. The investigation revealed hidden rooms that had remained sealed and undocumented for more than a century, and inside them were clues pointing to a purpose far more disturbing and darker than the famous ghost legend ever suggested. So what exactly did investigators find? And how did it completely change the way millions of people viewed this house? But before we can answer those questions, we have to start with the woman behind it all. The woman they misjudged. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, into one of the city's most respected families. The Pardees were wealthy industrialists and outspoken abolitionists, and education was taken seriously in their home. Sarah wasn't simply well-educated for a woman of the 1800s, she was unusually educated for anyone of her time. Records show she spoke fluent French, Italian, and Spanish. She studied mathematics, physics, and architecture, subjects that very few women and even many men had the opportunity to learn. Friends described her as brilliant, creative, and intensely private. That doesn't sound like someone who would accidentally spend nearly 4 decades building nonsense. In 1862, Sarah married William Wirt Winchester, the only son of Oliver Winchester, whose company produced the famous Winchester repeating rifle, the Model 1873, later called the gun that won the West, became one of the most recognizable firearms in American history. It helped fuel westward expansion, but it also became tied to countless deaths and the violent displacement of Native American communities. That means, long before the mansion became famous, the Winchester name already carried a complicated legacy. But the burden Sarah carried wasn't just attached to her family's name, it soon became deeply personal. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to her only child, Annie Pardee Winchester. Just 40 days later, Annie died from marasmus, a condition that prevented her tiny body from absorbing the nutrients she needed to survive. Sarah watched her daughter slowly fade away, day by day. 15 years later, in 1881, tuberculosis claimed William's life at just 43 years old, leaving Sarah completely alone. Along with unimaginable grief came unimaginable wealth. Sarah inherited about $20 million, worth well over $600 million today, nearly 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and an income of around $1,000 every single day, tax-free. She had more money than many towns and almost no one to answer to. And that's the moment when that famous ghost story actually began. According to the legend, a Boston medium warned Sarah that she was being haunted by the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles. To survive, she had to move west and never stop building. It's a powerful story, but there's just one problem. Historians have searched newspapers, personal letters, and other records from Sarah's lifetime and found no convincing evidence that the meeting ever happened. In fact, the famous Boston medium story didn't appear in print until after Sarah's death in 1922, when the mansion was being promoted as a tourist attraction. That changed the investigation completely, because if the ghost story wasn't the real reason Sarah built this house, what really drove her to create one of the strangest mansions ever built? A mansion full of lies. When structural engineers began examining the Winchester house, they weren't trying to solve a ghost story. They wanted to answer a much simpler question. Was the mansion's bizarre layout simply the result of decades of chaotic construction, or was it something much more deliberate? The house itself was unlike anything they had ever examined. Spread across nearly 24,000 square feet on a 5-acre property in San Jose, California, it eventually grew to around 160 rooms, with more than 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, and 47 fireplaces. Many of those windows were fitted with expensive Tiffany glass, while the fireplaces were scattered throughout the mansion because there was never a single unified heating system. But it wasn't the size that caught investigators' attention. It was the impossible design. Some staircases were built with steps barely 2 inches high, forcing anyone climbing them to take an unusually large number of steps. Windows appeared in places where windows should never exist, even in the floor. Doors opened onto solid brick walls, while others led straight to dangerous drops. In several places, support columns even appeared to be installed upside down. For decades, these strange features were dismissed as proof that Sarah Winchester had lost touch with reality. But when investigators examined the mansion with modern technology, that explanation quickly began to fall apart. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, along with FLIR thermal imaging, which can detect tiny temperature differences hidden behind thick plaster walls. They weren't searching for ghosts. They were mapping the house itself, looking for spaces that didn't match the official floor plans. What they discovered raised a far more unsettling question. The radar revealed large empty spaces where no rooms were supposed to exist. Thermal scans detected pockets of trapped, stagnant air sealed behind finished walls, suggesting entire sections of the house had been cut off from the rest of the mansion. At first, engineers suspected decades of renovations or earthquake repairs had simply left behind forgotten cavities. But the deeper they looked, the less that explanation worked. The hidden spaces weren't rough or unfinished. Many were fully constructed, complete with wallpaper and furnishings, before being completely enclosed by later construction. Someone hadn't simply abandoned these rooms. Someone had deliberately erased them. And if investigators were right, that raised a far more serious question. Not how this mansion had been built, but who or what had made Sarah Winchester hide entire sections of it from the world. The threat letters. The answer didn't come from another hidden room. It came from a hidden collection of papers. During the investigation, researchers uncovered a false bottom compartment in the basement. Inside were trunks filled with private letters, financial ledgers, stock records, and personal journals that had remained hidden for decades. And what those documents revealed immediately challenged another long-held belief about Sarah Winchester. She wasn't an isolated widow who had withdrawn from the world. The records showed she was personally managing one of the largest fortunes in America. And instead of handing everything over to trustees or advisors, Sarah closely monitored her investments, reviewed business records, and kept a careful eye on her nearly 50% ownership in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Her correspondence also revealed regular communication with influential businessmen, railroad executives, politicians, and other powerful figures of the Gilded Age. Then investigators reached another stack of documents, and the moment they opened them, the entire investigation changed. Mixed in with the business papers were dozens of threatening letters. Some were anonymous, others were signed. Several blamed the Winchester family for the violence their rifles had caused. Some came from people who claimed they had lost loved ones. A few demanded money. Others carried a far more chilling message that one day, Sarah Winchester herself would pay for what the Winchester name had done. But a handful of letters went even further. They threatened to expose confidential factory information. Others reportedly discussed kidnapping Sarah for a massive ransom. At the time, she was one of the richest women in the world, living alone with a fortune worth hundreds of millions in today's money. That made her an obvious target. Suddenly, investigators began looking at the mansion very differently. Those twisting hallways no longer looked random. They limited how far an intruder could see ahead. The unusually low 2-inch easy riser steps told a similar story. Built for Sarah's severe arthritis, they helped her move more easily through the house while slowing anyone unfamiliar with them. The blind doors, trick cabinets, and confusing passageways no longer looked like the work of a disturbed mind. Instead, they looked like carefully planned security features, designed to delay an intruder just long enough for Sarah to disappear into parts of the house that almost nobody knew existed. And if that interpretation was correct, the house wasn't chaotic at all. It was operating exactly as it had been designed to. So when investigators searched the mansion with that idea in mind, they no longer looked at each strange feature on its own. Instead, they started looking for a master plan. And before long, they found one. The hidden blueprint. The breakthrough came in one of the last places anyone expected. Behind a built-in cabinet near the third-floor ballroom, investigators discovered what looked like an ordinary section of wall. But after carefully removing it, they uncovered a small, windowless room that had remained sealed since Sarah Winchester's death in 1922. Thick dust covered every surface. Nothing suggested anyone had entered it for more than 100 years. But more than anything else, it was the walls that caught their attention. Every inch of plaster was covered with hand-drawn architectural drawings, and when investigators looked more closely, they realized these weren't just a few rough sketches, they were a complete blueprint of the Winchester house. For investigators, it was the biggest discovery of the investigation so far, because the house shown on those walls looked nothing like the one history believed Sarah Winchester had built. The drawings revealed reinforced safe rooms, strengthened with iron plating. They mapped narrow service corridors running alongside the main hallways, allowing someone to move through large sections of the mansion without ever being seen. They also showed hidden compartments connected to passageways that appeared on no official floor plan. But that wasn't the most surprising discovery. Some of the drawings pointed beneath the mansion itself. Investigators found plans for hidden underground chambers with their own ventilation systems, water storage, and shelves marked for preserved food. According to the blueprints, these spaces could remain usable for extended periods if the house above became unsafe. Then investigators noticed something even stranger. Most of the rooms weren't labeled with names. Instead, they were marked with geometric shapes, numbers, and unfamiliar symbols arranged in repeating patterns. At first, historians couldn't make sense of them, but after comparing hundreds of drawings, they reached a remarkable conclusion. This wasn't decoration. It was Sarah Winchester's own private cipher, a coded system that identified every hidden room without revealing its purpose. And that was the moment the investigation took its biggest turn yet. Piles of food and Sarah's carefully coded blueprints, they all pointed to one conclusion. This mansion hadn't been designed just to protect Sarah Winchester. It appeared to have been built to hide people. And when investigators finally opened those secret rooms, they found clues that these people weren't simply hiding there. They were there for a reason that would completely change the story of the Winchester house. Inside the secret rooms. Behind a wooden wall panel inside Sarah Winchester's private bedroom, investigators discovered a hidden spring latch. As they released it, the panel slowly slid aside, revealing a room that had remained sealed for more than a century. It wasn't another storage space. It looked almost clinical. The walls were heavily insulated with thick plaster, apparently designed to keep sound from traveling beyond the room. Inside stood late 19th century medical equipment. Early surgical lights, examination tables, shelves lined with glass apothecary bottles filled with antiseptics and sedatives. There were also medical instruments that immediately caught the attention of historians, but sitting beside them was something even more revealing. A collection of medical records. Each chart listed treatments, procedures, and dates. But one detail immediately stood out to investigators. Every patient's name was gone. Some had been carefully burned away. Others appeared to have been chemically erased, leaving only the medical details behind. Whoever kept these patients had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure no one would ever know who they were. But as investigators began connecting the evidence, the purpose of the hidden room became much harder to ignore. The surviving records pointed toward women's reproductive health care, including pregnancy complications, obstetrics, and childbirth. During the Victorian era, many women facing difficult or socially unacceptable pregnancies had very few safe places to turn. For some, even seeking medical care could destroy their lives. And if investigators are interpreting the evidence correctly, Sarah Winchester may have been quietly providing the kind of care many women simply couldn't receive anywhere else. But the hidden clinic was only part of the discovery. Connected to it were concealed living quarters with multiple beds, independent plumbing, preserved food supplies, and comfortable furnishings. These weren't temporary hiding places. Everything suggested women had stayed there for weeks, perhaps even months, recovering or waiting to safely give birth before returning to their lives unnoticed. Then, investigators uncovered something that made the discovery deeply personal. Hidden inside small wooden trunks were Victorian infant clothes, children's storybooks, handmade wooden toys, and other carefully preserved belongings. Some may have belonged to Sarah's own daughter, Annie, who died just 40 days after she was born. But there were far too many items to have belonged to one child. Suddenly, Sarah's mansion no longer looked like the hiding place of a frightened widow. It looked like a sanctuary, a place where vulnerable women, and perhaps their children, could quietly disappear until it was safe to return to the outside world. But if this was really happening inside the Winchester house, then Sarah's greatest achievement wasn't what she built. It was how she kept the world from discovering its true purpose for nearly 40 years. The perfect cover story. For decades, one room shaped the entire legend of the Winchester house. Visitors knew it as the Seance Room. According to the famous story, this was where Sarah Winchester locked herself away every night to communicate with spirits. The room's strange layout only fueled those rumors. It had multiple entrances, blue walls, a cabinet with 13 hooks, and features that seemed to make no practical sense. But investigators saw something very different. Hidden inside the walls were speaking tubes connecting the room to the servants' quarters and other parts of the mansion. Long before telephones became common, Sarah could quietly send instructions, receive updates, and monitor activity throughout the house without ever leaving the room. Suddenly, the entire room made sense. It wasn't built for talking to the dead. It was built to stay one step ahead of the living. Investigators believe Sarah may have understood something even more valuable. A haunted house keeps people away. If neighbors believed ghosts wandered its halls, they were less likely to trespass. If newspapers described its owner as a woman obsessed with spirits, few people would question why construction never seemed to end. And if everyone laughed at the mansion's bizarre design, almost nobody would stop to ask what it was really hiding. The ghost story may not have exposed Sarah Winchester's secrets. It may have protected them, but by the time the legend took hold, Sarah was already gone. On September 5, 1922, she died at the age of 83, and construction on the mansion stopped almost immediately. Over the years, the estate passed through new owners, changed with renovations, and eventually became a tourist attraction. As the mansion grew more famous, so did the legend of the haunted widow. But while millions came to know the ghost story, almost no one ever knew the real woman behind it all. The real Sarah. After months of investigation and one surprising discovery after another, researchers arrived at a conclusion few of them had expected. Sarah Winchester wasn't simply an eccentric widow trapped by grief. She may have been one of the most misunderstood women in American history. The financial records they uncovered pointed to a life the public never saw. Through anonymous bank drafts, trusted intermediaries, and private legal trusts, Sarah quietly funded women's suffrage organizations, early civil rights groups, hospitals, and medical research. She even provided ongoing financial support to Native American communities that had suffered during westward expansion, the very communities whose lives had been forever changed by the Winchester rifle. Yet, she deliberately kept her name off every donation. Investigators believe she didn't want the blood-stained reputation of the Winchester fortune to overshadow the people she was trying to help. And then there was Annie. Sarah's only daughter lived for just 40 days before dying of marasmus. It was a loss she carried for the rest of her life. Investigators believe that grief may have shaped everything that followed. If the hidden rooms really were a sanctuary, then perhaps Sarah spent the rest of her life protecting vulnerable women and children she couldn't bear to see suffer the way she had. In the end, the greatest mystery of the Winchester house may never have been the staircases to nowhere or the doors that opened into walls. It may have been how history transformed a brilliant, deeply private woman into little more than a ghost story. So, what do you think? Was Sarah Winchester really building a hidden sanctuary behind those mysterious walls, or has a century of rumors turned speculation into history? And if you've ever visited the Winchester Mystery House yourself, what part of it stayed with you long after you left? Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.